I'm often asked what my favourite Ferrari is for the road, and it's a really difficult question to answer, but if I had to have a 60s Ferrari and just one, it would probably be a 275 GTB. But then you ask, what sort of 275 GTB? So today, we thought we'd take the opportunity just to quickly run you through the cars step by step. I'm often asked the funny question, what is a 6-cam 275? Of course, there's no such thing as a 6-cam 275. It's people misinterpreting the adverts that say Ferrari 275 GTB 6C, as in 6C for 6 carburetors, not 3. So we have assembled this lineup of Ferraris here. And I think it's true to note that a 275 is probably the popular choice. My parents, who have had this business for nearly 45 years, have always had a 275 GTB in their life, as it's the best all-round 60s GT Ferrari. And why that is, we'll go through in a second. But let's start off first looking at the first variant. This is the 275 GTB as it was originally delivered and latterly nicknamed the short nose. Why is it called the short nose? Well, quite simply, it has a shorter nose than the later models where they added a longer nose with a different grille shape, different headlamp covers, and that was added for high-speed stability. But we'll come back to that. So essentially, the 275 GTB, it's a front-engined V12 3.3 litre. It has a 5-speed transaxle, which means that it has an axle and gearbox built into one under the back here, which helps give the car near-perfect 50-50 weight distribution. Launched in 1965, it was the first road Ferrari to feature all independent suspension. So the chassis frame was totally different to the short wheelbase that preceded it, and was a basic design that followed right through to the Daytona production in the early 70s. It meant that, as I said, independent suspension all round, disc brakes all round, transaxle, front engine V12, two-seater GTB cockpit, and made for a fantastic shape of car as well, because this is what we call the last of the soft designed Ferraris, in terms of with those lovely covered headlamps, with the sleek shape, with the cam rear tail of the car, with the vents in the side wings here, with the vents in the rear quarters. This was the last of what we call that soft-shaped Ferrari. You can see Tour de France in this design. You can see 250 short wheelbase. You can see 250 GTO. And after these, the cars became a lot more angular and modern in design. So therefore, being of mid-60s, it's for me the ultimate all-rounder, because technically it's also, the transaxle is a 5-speed gearbox, not a 4-speed, so in today's modern world it works really well. So we had very modern underpinnings with that all-independent suspension, the 5-speed gearbox, and a design that ran right through to the Daytona, but with this soft look. And that's what makes it the ultimate variant of a 60s Ferrari, in my opinion, to suit every occasion. So in this lineup, we've got everything from short nose, right-hand drive, aluminium, 4-cam, through to both variants of GTBC, as we call them. We're going to start here now with the short nose. So the short nose, the original design, there were 248 of these built in total, of which 18 were right-hand drive. A particular difference that we'll pick up later on is, as well as the short nose, this smaller rear screen, and internally the dashboard was almost always finished with this wood veneer finish around the instruments and the gauges and in the centre console. 239 short noses were built, and like this car, just 18 were right-hand drive from new. And as you'll see, this car is fitted with the very attractive starburst wheels. Most of the cars would have been delivered on these in period, and over the years they've been changed for wire wheels, but today there's been a bit of a return to this look, and people are desperate to find these wheels. And if you need a set, you can contact dkengineering's parts department, as we always know where to find them. But they are a magnesium alloy, and they are a really fitting look, only found on the short nose. They should never be found on a long nose or later. Next up is another of the 18 right-hand drive 275 GTB short noses, but this one is slightly different. Whereas the first two cars were fitted with 3 carburetors from new, this car was fitted with 6 carburetors from new, and that's where 6C comes from, the 275 GTB 6C. So let's quickly take a look at the differences in the engine bay. So under the bonnet of this car, you can see the larger airbox. So this airbox is ever so slightly deeper than the 3 carburetor example, and you can see the 6 individual carburetors. Also, the fuel rail on the 6 carb is on the driver's side of this right-hand drive car. If we move over to the 3 carb, you can see that the airbox isn't as deep as the 6 carb. There are clearly only 3 carburetors, and the fuel rail is on the passenger side of this right-hand drive car. That's the difference between 275 GTB 3C and 275 GTB 6C. So finally, just to differentiate between the 3 carb and the 6 carb, the power difference. Ferrari quoted an official figure of around about 300 horsepower in period, but in reality, on today's rolling roads, we find about 245 horsepower. 6 carburetors were claimed to give you an extra 20 to 25 horsepower. However, again today, we don't tend to see too much of a difference unless you fit uprated cams as well as the 6 carburetors. But certainly with uprated cams and 6 carburetors, you will be able to have more power. That's not the only thing to consider though. Living with 6 carburetors is more difficult. They require more tuning and they are much easier to flood from cold. Next in the lineup is this, what we call Series 1 275 GTBC, or a 7 Series 275 GTBC, quite simply meaning that its chassis number starts with the number 7, or the official name, the 275 GTB Competizione Clienti, i.e. a competition 275 built for customers of Ferrari. Something we haven't mentioned already is that all the bodies of the 3 cars we've looked at so far are made from steel. But with this car came the introduction of the aluminium body. You couldn't get a road 275 GTB short nose with an aluminium body. It was just these 10 cars only that were fitted with an aluminium body. Other differences were that the fuel tank in the back of this car, instead of being in the rear lower quarters, was fitted vertically to help with that 50-50 weight distribution, as well as giving you an outside fuel filler position up high on the right-hand side here. We had some additional cooling vents in the rear quarters here, very reminiscent of a 250 GTO or similar, which means that you can tell the car apart from the rest instantly. Aside from that, the cars were pretty much the same as the 6 carburetor 275 GTB short nose, but a very special car indeed, and of those 10 built, only 3, like this car, were right-hand drive. Next in the lineup, a 275 GTB long nose. Now this is where it gets a little bit confusing because the 275 4-cam that you see next to it is also a long nose, but a early long nose 275 is effectively exactly the same mechanically as a short nose, just with this longer nose and a few other little features which I'll run you through. So this was introduced for high-speed stability. In truth, it was probably just a way to extend the range in terms of its life, because the model was already very popular, having built nearly 250 short noses. And this was still the 2-cam short nose, still with the same transaxle and drive shaft layout, exactly the same mechanically as the short nose. Aside from the different length nose, you had this different bonnet. So instead of having the slight raised section that was across the majority of the width of the short nose, this goes to an entirely flat bonnet. Then, when we move to the back of the car, this rear screen is suddenly much bigger. And that means that the hinges for the boot lid are now external instead of being internal. The Ferrari badge moved from above the number plate onto the rear boot lid. And finally, instead of having a parcel shelf that had some luggage straps on, the luggage straps went down into behind the rear seats, and the parcel shelf inside itself internally went higher, which gave for a bigger boot capacity. Those were your differences. One thing we haven't mentioned about this particular car is the fact that it has an aluminium body. Now, we've already mentioned that on the steel short noses, that was all that was available, no aluminium option. However, once the long nose was introduced, it became a very low cost option. And of all of the 2-cam 275 GTB long noses built, 86 were steel bodied and 48 were aluminium bodied. And from the external, we have 2 very telltale points that tell us this car is an aluminium body. And they are here. We've got a seam across the top of the windscreen here, and a seam from the rear screen to the rain gutter, as we call it. And the rain gutter is actually longer on the long nose than it is on the short nose as well, because of that larger rear screen. Next up in the 275 GTB lineup, the 4-cam. This is said to be the sewing machine of the 275 range. And by that I mean the smoothest, the nicest to use and enjoy, and that's for 2 main reasons. One, the simple fact of the matter is the engine no longer has only 2 camshafts, but 4 camshafts, or 2 cams per bank. And that helps give better linear torque, better peak power, and a smoother freer revving, easy engine. Visually, the main difference is this bulge on the bonnet. So you remember we had a wide bulge for the short nose, no bulge for the long nose 2 cam, and now we come to the long nose 4 cam, and by the way, all 4 cams were long nose. We have this narrow power bulge, which denotes that it is a 4 cam. Internally, the only difference is also that the engine is dry sump. So in the engine bay, we've got a filler for the dry sump oil tank. There were 331 steel 275 GTB 4 cams built. 29 of those were right-hand drive. And then there were 19 aluminium bodied 275 GTB 4 cams, of which 1 was right-hand drive. The second thing that improved the driveline of this car was not only the fact that it was a 4 cam engine, but it was mated to the transaxle via a torque tube. So fundamentally, the main differences were that the engine, instead of having 4 engine mounts fitting it in the chassis, it only had 2 engine mounts. And the gearbox at the back, or the transaxle, also had 2 mounts. And between those two was a torque tube. And that torque tube absorbs a lot of the vibration and the harsh driving nature that you found in earlier 250s and the early 275s, thus making for a really smooth driveline that, coupled to that 4 cam engine, is just magic. However, I'm just going to go back one step, because one car that we don't have here today is a 275 GTB long nose 2 cam with a torque tube. Yes, that's right, just to complicate things, just before they ended the production of the 2 cam to insert the 4 cam, some of the long nose 2 cam 275s were indeed also fitted with a 2 mount engine and a torque tube between it and the transaxle, which made again for a smooth driveline, but only 2 cams. Numbers wise, there were 95 275 GTB long nose 2 cams built with a torque tube equipped from new, and of those 95, 12 were aluminium bodied. Finally, what we would refer to as the daddy of 275s, it's not technically the latest car, it sits somewhere between the 275 GTB 2 cam long nose and the 4 cam, but this is a Series 2 275 GTBC, or a 9 Series chassis number 275 GTBC. And this actual car ran at Le Mans with Roy Pike and Piers Courage, winning its class in 1966. And in 1967 it was raced internationally by the same person who owns the car today and still uses it and enjoys it. And it's a car I've known all my life, and it is a fantastic example of a 275, if not one of the very best. Fundamentally, it is a 2 cam engine. It's 4 mounts, not 2, so it doesn't have a torque tube. And it is actually the same engine as a 250 LM. So a 275 LM, 3.3 litre. It's dry sump. As you can see, it has the oil filler in the wing there, which was for when it was racing, that they could top up with oil during the race. It has the same aluminium body as the long noses we've seen. The rear end of the car is in fact wider so that it can fit the bigger wheels and tyres. Underneath the front, the bodywork is ever so slightly different. It's got a little bit more scalloped out so that the air can get to the front brakes. And fundamentally, it's a super thin, lightweight aluminium body. So this is a really, really special car. There were only 12 built in total. This is one of the 2 right-hand drive, and as mentioned, it's a Le Mans class winner, and it's been in the same ownership for many, many years, presented in this fantastic livery as per its 66 Le Mans adventure. So that's the summary of our 275s. Let's have a little walk back down the line just to pick up all the different features again in reverse. Virtually all the early 275 GTB short noses had this wood veneer dash and centre console. But if we move to the long nose, you find this black vinyl on the dash and in the centre console. And on this particular car, the rare option of headrests. So in reverse order, we have the 275 GTB 4 cam. 4 camshafts in the engine, 2 per bank. It's a 2 mount engine, it's torque tube. It has this larger rear window, a higher parcel shelf, bigger boot capacity, hinges on the outside of the boot lid, and the Ferrari badge on the top of the boot lid here. Long nose, of course, at the front, and a narrow power bulge on the bonnet to signify it's a 4 cam. Also, the cast wheels with the straight-eared spinners to match. This car is a 275 GTB long nose 2 cam with an aluminium body. How do we know it's aluminium? Well, it's got these 2 seams here in the roof, which a steel car would not have. But a 2 cam again, like the 4 cam, larger rear window, hinges on the outside, Ferrari badge on the top of the boot lid. This particular car has the prancing horse shield that it had from the factory as an option. It also has headrests, which throughout the range you could ask for that as an option. And being a 2-cam long nose, it has this flat bonnet with no bulge in it whatsoever. 275 GTBC Series 1 or Competizione Clienti or 7 Series 275 GTBC. This is a short nose, all aluminium body, small rear window. The hinges are on the inside. This has the Ferrari badge on the back there. The fuel tank, instead of being in the rear quarters, is vertical with the outside fuel filler up high there. That helped with the weight distribution. This has an open prop shaft, so no torque tube. Just quickly going back to those long-nosed 275 2-cams, that was available with open shaft or later on torque tube, just like the 4-cam. This car is fitted on Starburst magnesium alloy wheels. Also, because it's a GTBC, it has these vents in the rear here, which are distinct to this car and gives it that racy look. We move on to this 6-carburettor 275 GTB short nose. This is a steel body, again, small rear window, no hinges here, badge on the back of the car. This car is fitted with wire wheels with the curved eared spinners. It has 6 carburettors. It's right-hand drive as well. This is another rare right-hand drive, so only 19 of these in total, 2 next to each other, but a 3-carb 275 GTB short nose. One thing we didn't mention on the previous one is that the parcel shelf on this car is lower. It has luggage straps, so you could put your luggage in there, but when we went to long nose, they moved the height of that up. You had some luggage straps behind the seats, but the boot capacity, because the parcel shelf was higher, was greater. And then our very first car here, which is the start of the 275 GTB range. It's a 3-carb 275 GTB short nose. The bonnet has got this wider bulge, which is only on the short nose. And that's the range. There are a few other bits and pieces that I may have missed, but hopefully that helps you answer the question. What is a 6-cam 275? It doesn't exist, but there is a huge amount of variety across the range, and this is just some of it.